So we can do that prayer before the teachings, so page 60 something. What page was it? Prayers before teachings. It's page 69. So we can do a couple here. We can do it, yeah. Okay. So just thinking, everything comes down to the thoughts. And we create the thoughts, we make the thoughts, we can cultivate the thoughts. We don't just wait for thoughts to come in. We be in charge of our thoughts. We're thinking we're sitting here. Those of us who are Buddhists who identify, we're thinking, we're reminding ourselves, we're reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines are expressing this altruistic reason or motivation, purpose for our being here together, to listen to teachings, to listen to Buddha's views, to see if there's some tools we can take from it to help us develop our own amazing potential so we can be a benefit to others. Finally, to become a Buddha, free of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness. And then just for auspiciousness here, we'll also do the next little prayer, which is making this, what they call a mandala offering. Thinking of the universe, this idea of a mandala is just the abode of different beings, different Buddhas. They have their own abode, it's expressed in those circular paintings. They're like architectural drawings. So here we can think of the world, our world. This is our mandala, our life, our world. So this mandala offering is thinking of all the things on this planet, all the things on this earth, all the things that make people happy, all the objects of the senses. We're piling them all up and offering them to the Buddha, as if the Buddha were here himself as a request for the teachings. Thinking like that. Sangye charang soke chognamla jangcho baru dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gipe sonamki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye charang soke chognamla jangcho baru dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gipe sonamki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye charang soke chognamla jangcho baru dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gipe sonamki drola penche sangye drupa shog. And the next two, this mandala and the inner mandala, offering all our delusions and all the objects of our delusions. Saji perki jogsing metog tramri rablingji ni de gen padi sange jingdu mikte olwagi drokon namdag jingla chepashog dagi chagdang mongsum kepe yul dranyen basum ludang long cheche pangpa mepa bulgi legjene dogsum rangsa drolwa jingilob. And now we say the Sanskrit mantra, we think the Buddha happily accepts our offering, our request. Idam guru ratna mandala kam niryatayami. So one of the first teachings that Buddha gave, and in terms of ease of understanding, it comes earlier, it comes before other teachings, because it's in one way it's almost like in the Lam Rim, it's almost like a first thing to think about, to prime our minds to even want to practice, to abide by the laws of karma, and that's to think about impermanence. There's extensive teachings in the literature on how things are impermanent, meaning how things that are the result of causes naturally change moment by moment, and then at a grosser level will literally disappear, break, die, collapse, people, houses, relationships. But at a subtler level, there's a subtler understanding, subtle impermanence, which is very extensively explained. And actually, this is the main meditation of the Theravada practitioners. I remember asking one of them from Burma, when do you meditate on emptiness? He said, oh no, that comes naturally. after this. And actually you can be forgiven for confusing subtle impermanence with emptiness. You know, but it's an excellent stepping stone. But here, Atisha, this 11th century Indian yogi scholar who came to Tibet, when he wrote his little text, Lamp for the Path, which is the basis of Tsongkhapa's 14th century Lam Rim literature, when he presented the teachings, taking from all the vast body of Buddha's philosophy, psychology, metaphysics, etc., he took the essential meaning and from the experiential point of view of all the main teachings and put them in this orderly fashion. And that's the basis, as I said, of the Lam Rim literature. So the very first teaching, like junior school, grade 1 entry level, before you even begin to abide by the laws of karma, Atisha's kind of agenda to get us to think about impermanence here, he gets us to think about it particularly about death. And whose death? Your death. And why? Because his agenda, it's impermanence, it's the teaching on impermanence, it's extensive, but he gets it to be very personal. Because, you know, the experiential result of this contemplation about death and impermanence is that life is short. We have no idea, you know, so he presents it in 3 points. So his agenda is to give us a wake-up call, not to waste this precious life. And then we then contemplate other points, and then it concludes in I must practice, I must abide by the laws of karma, refrain from harming others, and you know, purify the negative karma so that at least when I die I get another decent human rebirth. At least that. So okay, let's look at this idea then, this whole business about death. Well, first of all, impermanence in general is a really powerful teaching. You know, it's an incredible way to really already transform us in our daily life. Because, and why Buddha gives, if you think about all the Buddha's teachings, all he's doing is giving his presentation of how things exist. And he's saying that we right now, being in samsara, being samsaric beings, having all these delusions, we think exactly the opposite. So he's suggesting one of the main delusions in our mind, as Lama Zopa puts it, is grasping at this permanent me. So permanent in Buddhism has 2 meanings, really. There's a general meaning of lasting forever, but here the real meaning is not changing moment by moment. We're kind of very stuck in believing this is who I am and I'm the same person plodding through life, whether I'm 5 or 95. I mean, we look in the mirror, we know the body's a lot older, but the sense of who we are is a very solid sense of unchanging me, you know. So this is a huge problem because it's not reality. That's Buddha's key point. We suffer because we're not living in reality. That's his key point. And that's all he's on about. Every single teaching of the Buddha is his own findings about how things are, which contradicts how we think things are. That's why he says we suffer. There's always this disconnect between how reality and how we see things. That's his point. From A to Z, from here to enlightenment, that's his point. So impermanence is a really excellent starting point. And even beginning to realize impermanence, the way they say it, means to really just experientially to know that first point, that death is definite. Second point, no idea when I'm going to die. Then it really gets us to want to not waste this precious life. And therefore, conclusion, better start practicing right now. You know. So that's the agenda. Atisha's agenda is that. It's like a wake-up call. So let's look at this presentation, the way Atisha puts it, and then Tsongkhapa explains it. You know, there's 3 like bullet points. The first 2 are the real ones to think about. The third bullet point is the conclusion, the action point, you know. The action point. So that can apply to everything in life. Everything's changing. But here in particular he gets us to think about the changing of this person, because that's when it's really personal. The same principle applies to relationships, to products, to things, you know. But to think of this person not existing is a very powerful wake-up call, you know, the thing we cling to most. And as Lama Zopa says, we're going to go into that at the time of death. We're going to go. There's 2 approaches to death. One is to look at this practical approach of how we live our life within the framework of that I will die. And then there's the actual process of death itself, and indeed how we can learn to be ready for that, and also to help others die, so that we can be certain, be confident we can get another decent human rebirth, so at least that, so we can keep on moving on our spiritual path. From the Buddhist point of view, it's a very practical thing, you know. So, okay, the first point is death is definite. The second point is this time of death is absolutely not definite. And the third point is, you know, what to do about it. What's the point? What's the conclusion, you know? So the first, I mean, these seem fairly evident points. We all know perfectly well death is definite. What, we think, yeah, Buddha, we know this. Why are you telling us, you know? But we might know intellectually, and this is easy to know intellectually. Emptiness we can't even get intellectually. Impermanence we can get intellectually. Karma even, explaining the concept of it is not intellectually difficult, it's just emotionally difficult because we don't like it. Because the views we have now are so profoundly different. So we can't hear it properly. But this one is really clearly obvious. And yet nevertheless, because of this grasping, this deep delusion in here, because of intense attachment, we can't stand the thought of death. We don't even like the word. It's horrifying, you know. So what's the Buddha's approach to it? Well, this approach here is the first thing is to think about how death is definite. There's formal ways that you do all of this stuff in meditation, but this is just a viewpoint. These are just viewpoints that we can apply every second of our day. You don't need to be sitting with your legs crossed and your eyes closed doing it. So the first evident thing, the first point which is evident, but to become more familiar with so we really know it's true, is that death is definite. So that means how do you apply that in daily life? Well, I mean, it's very easy all the time. I mean, especially these days where the world is completely open to us. We're hearing about death every second, all kinds of deaths. You know, look on the ground, you see creatures die. You look in front of you, animals die, people die, babies die. Death is really definite. It's evident. It's logical that whatever comes into being, we're talking sentient beings here, will definitely end. And the more we understand the nature of impermanence, the more we understand cause and effect, then the nature of cause and effect is that something comes into being and it will collapse, you know. So, of course, the Buddhist view of how long things take, that's due to karma. That's another whole discussion. We get to karma later. But the simple point here is that when we realize that death is definite, then we try to make it as a wake-up call. So in other words, how do we apply it when we see it? Well, right now what happens depends on who's dying, you know. If you read the news about some country you can't even say the name of, it's hardly very much. So, you know, for example, I always say this story. I looked at my iPad in my New York Times one morning, and on the right-hand corner story, the heading said, 350 people die in ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, that's my people, right? I'm Australian. Even though I'm also British and American, but, you know, I'm Australian. So, oh no, I said, and I looked at it, and then I realised it said Tanzania. And I went, oh, it's okay. Naturally. And I had to think, oh God, where's Tanzania, you know? So I had to read the story and have compassion. But it wasn't my people. And this is about friends, enemies and strangers, you know. 99% of the universe is strangers. And we really don't care about them because they don't touch our life. We'll go into this when we talk about the compassion wing. So it depends on who's dying, is how we feel. So we all know the closer to home it gets, the more painful it is. And indeed we will get great, and when it really gets to home, and it's our beloveds or our pussycat or our poodle or our mummy or our partner, then it really is painful. But we're still not getting the point. The point is here, the wake-up call, the simple conclusion is to think, that'll happen to me. There's this very interesting, which we can read if you like, there's this very interesting kind of heavy-duty Tibetan verse prayer about impermanence. And each of those lines, honey, that doesn't say that. That'll be me. That'll happen to me. Isn't it? This is going to happen to you, you know. So we all know it, but to say it is when it gets the wake-up call. Because how we feel about death is if there's a bunch of horrible people, we almost don't, you know, we almost have to refrain from rejoicing. If it's people who we like a bit closer, like Australians, come Australian, you go, oh no. And then it's your family, it's the worst, but we don't get the point. That's called compassion, if you like. That's called whatever. That's called fear. The point is, the wake-up call, the action point is, that'll be me. So the second we say that, then we get the point. So then, of course, given that I will die, then you go, well, then what? Then what? And right now, when we think that, all we do is get fear, you know, because we don't know what else to think about it. And that's the point. So now it depends on what your view is. So if you're a Christian, it's very meaningful to you because you know that death is coming and you want to be ready for it because you want to be with God. And that is a really excellent approach. At least it makes you live your life decent, you know. At least you've got an answer to what will happen. But if we're philosophical materialists, it's a very different discussion, isn't it? If that's your view of the world, then you think about death. It's either something you go, oh, well, that's okay, you know, I'll turn into dust, or because we're so attached, we don't want to think about it. And this is what's interesting when we'll discuss later, well, now, the death process. And this is coming from Lama Zopa's book, Wisdom Publishers, it's called How to Enjoy Death. And there's also a version of it that you can download for free from FPMT. A PDF. So it's Rinpoche's advice on how to help your loved ones, you know, which means, of course, you becoming familiar with the whole process of death. So the first part of it is all about what is death and what happens at death, the 8 stages of death. We'll go into all that, and then it's the advice. Basically, it's a handbook of advice: what to do for the weeks and months before your loved one dies, how to help them, create a conducive situation, all the various practices you can do. The 2/3 of the book is these 87 different practices that Rinpoche would recommend at different points, you know. it's a handbook basically. What to do the weeks and months before, what to do the days before, what to do the hours before, what to do when the breath stops, what to do when the days after the breath stops, what to do when the mind leaves the body, and then what to do with the week, for the weeks afterwards. And much of it is about, and because it's all for the dying person, it's all about them. It's not about what we would consider to be grief and all about us, you know. So naturally, if you're a Christian, you have the Christian approach to it, what happens to the person after they die. But most of us have the materialist view, so it's always about us. I remember a friend of mine saw the manuscript, she said, where's the chapter on grief? Well, that's about us. The book is about the dying person, you know, in terms of helping people. Of course, it implies it's us because we're going to die too. So much of the advice I'm discussing here is coming from Lama Zopa's book, you know, which is the Buddhist approach. So the wake-up call here for the Buddhist one, clearly because Buddha would assert that the consciousness continues, then death has a very different light. It's got a similar one to the Christian one. Clearly, it's similar. At least something happens after you die. But again, like if you're a materialist, then the conclusion is you turn into dust. You know, you go back to the earth. That's it. And I'm not criticizing any view. So then, obviously, the more attachment we have to ourself, and as Lama Zopa says, the main reason that death is so fearful for most people is because of attachment. And attachment to what? To me, to this. And because we believe this is me, attachment to the body. This is the source of most people's fear at the time of death. And therefore, throughout our life, why we have denial. And why we have denial about anything, it seems to me, is because we don't have an explanation for what it is. And I'm not saying whether it's a right one or a wrong one. If you even have a view that's ridiculous, at least you think you've got a view. So you're not going to be so afraid. You see my point? So the Christian view is that you're going to be in heaven with God. The Buddhist view is you can continue your life, and the best approach, the best life to get is another human one. It's about the best of a bad lot. So you aim for that. At least you want another decent human body. But if you're a materialist, what is there? What do you got to look forward to? Nothing but a black hole, you know. So because the more we're attached to our daily life, the more we're attached to who we think we are, the more we're attached to our things and our relationships, and see everything as now because we can't bear the thought of not having it, then of course death is a horrible idea. Naturally we've got to live in denial. You don't want to be happy about death. It's reasonable. It's reasonable that fear is normal, you know. So the Buddhist approach is, if we live within the fact of impermanence, live within the fact that death is that is part of life, you know. And the point about why it's so important at the time of death, as Rinpoche says in his book, if you want to help anybody during their life, the time they need you most is at the time of death. And we're going to go into the reasonings for this, you know. But from our own point of view, this view of Atishas in the Lam Rim, the very first stages, think about death. The first one is just recognize by looking at the regular world. Look in front of your face, you're going to see death is definite. Whoever comes into being will definitely die. And we know all these things, so we tend to get, like I said, a bit arrogant. Well, we know that. Come on, give me something more exciting. But we don't know it. Because why? Because we have this enormous grasping at permanent me. So also to help understand, it's very... You know, how we see how we are in our life, how we think about things, how we do, we completely believe that things are permanent, meaning unchanging. You know, I always quote an interview I read, because I read lots of papers and magazines and things. You can tell I'm old because I don't look at social media much. I look at newspapers and magazines. I even pay for them. You know, I read the New York Times, Financial Times, the Melbourne Age, the Washington Post, Vanity Fair, Vogue. I like design and I like good writing, so you know, it's my profession, publishing. So that's more. I don't look at social media. I mean, I might occasionally look at. No, I don't even know how to get into my Facebook page. People pass me the messages, you know. And other ones I haven't got a clue. Anyway, whatever. So I was reading an interview years ago about Nicole Kidman when she was with Tom Cruise. I always quote this. And she said at the end of the interview, "We will be together until we're 80." Now, we happen to know that, you know, Penelope Cruz came along, and so they weren't. Well, I know that. You mightn't. Because I read the papers. I mean, I'm joking a bit. But the point is, it's a really powerful point. That's exactly how we feel. So, and why this has got so much to do with attachment. It's very fascinating. Think of attachment. Attachment is this hunger in us. Attachment is this feeling I haven't got enough, so hungry for something, and depending on our karma, it'll be bodies or people or handbags or approval or whatever. You understand? And then the hunger gets that thing, and then the belief is, now I've got it, now I'm happy. That's where we impose the permanence onto it, because basically you can't stand the thought. That thing that you're craving so hugely, that you now have got, and now that there you are in this relationship. We're all the same. We've got this relationship, let's say. She had this relationship with Tom. And when it's going well, it's like this, you're in this bubble. It's so perfect. Things are well. You've got your life, you've got your kids, and everything's taken for granted, isn't it? So naturally, and this is what we do. This is how we lie to ourselves. Because it's nice now, we assume we will be together until we're 80. That's an actual projection we put onto it because it's delicious now and it feels so familiar and so wonderful. This is exactly what happens with attachment. So grasping at permanent me, meaning unchanging, and then because we can't bear the thought of it changing, attachment kicks in. So you think it'll be forever. And that's even just when you get a job. Oh, now I've found it. Now I've got a job. Now everything's great. As soon as we get that thing, now we think, now I've got it, and then we set it in stone, you know. And that's why we always get unhappy. This is Buddha's key point from beginning to end. Keep thinking this. It's very fascinating. The reason we suffer is because there's a disconnect between how things are and how we see things. That's it. That's from here to enlightenment. That's Buddha's view. That's why the whole job is changing the mind. And he's suggesting his view is truth. He's allowed to say that. We get a bit nervous when it comes to religion, saying someone's right. We call it dogma. But excuse me, if Einstein comes and sits up and presents his findings about relativity, but then says, I'm not sure if I'm right, we'll tell him to shut up until he is right. You know, look, if he's confident, tell us what he knows, but he's not telling us to believe him, is he? And he's not forcing us down our throats. That's the same with Buddha. Whereas if it is Christianity because we can't prove God is right, you have to believe it. And that's why we get upset about things, you know. So it's really important to see this. Of course, Buddha's saying he's right. Of course he is. I hope he thinks he's right. I hope he gives his logic. Then it's up to us to prove it. So what he says is reality is consciousness continues. What he says is reality, things change from moment to moment. What he says is reality, that law of cause and effect runs everything. What he says is reality, that nothing has an intrinsic nature. This is the stuff of Buddhism. This is the stuff of Buddha's philosophy and psychology, and it's from his findings. So here we're discussing the process of how to get in touch with impermanence, to start our practice, even just to get some realization of impermanence, already can have a profound effect on your life. You learn to be much more realistic. You let go of things more easily. You stop clinging to things. So you realize that because it's delicious now, it might be delicious forever, but you don't waste your time. When things are bad, you know it won't last forever. So you're much more grounded, have much more equanimity. So grasping at permanence is one of the major reasons we suffer terribly. You know, up and down like yo-yos, bashing up against reality all the time and unable to bear it. So that's what's interesting. So Nicole's point, I'm always quoting the poor woman, I like her, you know. Now she's found, what's his name? With her 2 children, Sunday and Faith. And they live in Nashville, don't they? Where Nikki lives. Where's Nikki? Where is Nikki? I haven't seen her for days. Oh, there she is. Good. Yeah, they said keep her, and that's a guy, Australian. That's right. Anyway, this is the point. When things are going beautifully, and that's exactly how we all are, we know this. When everything's going well, we don't realize we then set it in stone. It'll be this forever. And that's why, because reality is it won't be forever. It might be a long time, but it won't be forever because things change. It's reality. So when it does change, we're devastated. The bubble bursts and we crash down to despair. This is bipolar, and I'm not joking, I mean it. That's attachment and aversion. We're up and down like 1,000 mini bipolar episodes a day, every one of us. So what happened is, there she was, perfect, everything's perfect, we'll be together until we're 80. But then interestingly, the next sentence, she said, and of course, if we won't be, I will be devastated. And that was really powerful, she said that. And indeed, she was devastated. I made other interviews with her when she was in fetal position on the ground, you know, unable to bear the pain. And this is the point now I'm saying. When everything's perfect, when attachment's getting what it wants, we believe it won't change. And then when it collapses, which it must, because there's only one option for when attachment collapses, is aversion and despair or indifference. So because she was in the middle of the relationship, it collapsed. And then she crashes to despair. And now this is the point, isn't it? Now you believe that is permanent. Now you believe that will never change. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's why we kill ourselves. We think that's permanent. That's what depression is. Our attachment's all perky and happy, or aversion kicks in, and there's just despair. There's nothing to look forward to. Because one of the main functions of attachment is always planning, always looking forward to something. That's what keeps us perky most of the day, you know. Now I'll do this, and now I'll do that, and now I'll go here, and I'll come back, now I'll have lunch, and I'll go to the toilet, now I'll get up, now I'll go there, then I'll have a retreat, then I'll do this. Always planning, pushing forward. Nothing wrong with planning. But when it's with attachment, it's all kind of overexcited and ridiculous, you know. So when you're grasping at things as lasting forever, when it's delicious, you're blissfully happy, and then it collapses and you're now blissfully despairing. Either way, you can't see that it will change. We see it as permanent, unchanging, because we can't bear the thought when it is delicious that it'll change, and we can't stand the pain when we think it won't change when it's bad. So even realizing impermanence, you won't get too despairing. You would not get too depressed. That's logic. But that means delving deep inside and unpacking all these and changing all these assumptions we have that are so deep inside us. These conceptual stories, you know. So death is definite. See it, real it, every day. Then what's the conclusion? Well, the second point before we get to the conclusion is this next one should scare the life out of us, actually. The time of death is absolutely not definite. And this really we can see we live in la la land in relation to. Like Nicole, we will be together till we're 80. So we visualize ourselves until we're 80, 90, old. So we think, you know, we've got all this life ahead of us. We believe this with absolute certainty. Absolute certainty. Even when we're old, and those of you here who are old, we're in the old category, you still feel like you're the same as you felt when you're 20, you know. You look in the mirror, you get shocked. But if you never looked in a mirror or looked at your body, you wouldn't know, because it feels. And so and this is the thing about trying to change this, to realize that, you know, one approach to this one is, one approach to this is realize every day you wake up, you're one day closer to death. Now this sounds depressing to us, of course, but it's a fact. But we don't feel it's like that. And I find that very powerful. You know, like you know, here, for example, when we don't know how long it takes, but let's say we knew how long. I don't know, I thought it was 2 hours. It was only 45 minutes, was it? This walk up to here? I really believed it was 2 hours. I was expecting 2 hours. It felt like 2 hours. Anyway, even it feels like 2 hours getting from my room to here. Anyway, if you're like familiar, you know, when you're familiar, let's say you go to work every day from your home and you're really familiar with it, there's a really good example. We know you've got a sense it's an hour. You know each of the signposts. You know as you go, there's that street, there's that thing, there's that pub, there's that, and you've got a vivid experience, isn't it? The more you're driving towards work, you're driving away from home. You have this vivid feeling of moving towards something, don't you? You can see it, anticipate it, know it. That feeling of moving towards something and away from something is very real. But you look how we feel about life. We feel like every day is permanent and the same as when I was 20. There's no feeling of moving towards death. And it sounds too depressing to us, but it's really powerful, simple concept, because it's a fact. Because it's a fact. Okay, what's the point of it? We haven't got to the third point yet, which is the action point. But this is really logical. We're moving towards death, and a really powerful way to think about it. As Lama Zopa says, the best thing to think is, I will die today. But of course it's hilarious. I mean, I've been saying these words for a long time, trying to be a good Buddhist, but I can tell you, as I say the words now, I don't believe I'll die today. I really do not believe I'll die today. I do not believe it. Part of me knows it's true, but I do not believe it. There's this wonderful story about a Tibetan astrologer. I love this story. I don't know how they pass these stories on, because the guy died, so it must have been somebody in the room with him to tell the story. I love this story. He was this astrologer, and he did his own chart. And it turned out that he was going to die today, according to his chart. Well, his first response was, oh, where did I make a mistake? So he's sitting there apparently with his arm on the windowsill, and he's got a thing poking his ear, you know, a long pokey thing poking his ear, contemplating his chart, where he made the mistake. And then the wooden shutter went zoom, and it went in, and he died. I love that story. He didn't believe he was going to die today. His own thing said he would. He didn't believe it. I love that story. It's so obvious. Even when you're called dying. My friends on death row, they're dying. So my friend Mitch, he's amazing. He's getting ready for his death date. He used to write quite a bit. Now he doesn't waste time. He's just doing his practices, you know. He's incredible. He's the dearest man in the whole world. I just read in the paper this morning, in Texas, I'd been to Texas to see prisoners. They won't let this guy on death row as a Buddhist. They refuse to let his Buddhist chaplain be with him. So the Supreme Court cancelled his death until they let him, which is very interesting. I went there to see a bunch of prisoners, and yeah, I was going to be with a guy who died, who was going to be executed, but they wouldn't let me. The Baptist, he was a Baptist, but fundamentalist, Baptist chaplain, warden. Well, first of all, you don't believe in God, you're not really religious, and second, anyway, you're only a nun, he said. So he wouldn't. So anyway, the guy had his sentence commuted anyway, but he wouldn't have let me, even though the law says you're allowed to be. But that's Texas for you. Texas is incredible. I went to one. I had to visit half a dozen guys one week I was there, and I forgot one fellow. And if he'd heard I'd been to Texas without seeing him, he would have been devastated. So you got to have all this bureaucracy and ring up and get forms and everything. So I rang the prison, hoping he'd just let me come. You know, the chaplain. And the moment I said the word Buddhist, it was like this cold. We don't need people like you here, he said, and put the phone down. You know, it's very obvious. It was incredible. I think these days are a bit more open about Buddhism. They practically think you're like the devil. You know. Anyway, where were we? Yeah, my friend Mitch, he's really getting ready for death. Actually there's another guy, I think Amy was his main person, Amy Miller, our friend, her nun. She was like his mentor. And he was, I think, Georgia a few years ago, and he had his death date, and the prison allowed him to receive phone calls from different people. So he couldn't receive foreign phone calls. I was in another country, so I had to get one person to call the prison and then have me on Skype. Then have the phone near the Skype so I could chat to him, you know. Anyway, he really knew he was dying. He was incredible. And he had his Buddhist practice. He liked Vajrasattva. And he was just single-pointed. He was joyful and completely focused. And when you know that's all there's left, when you know that's all there is, that's another good way to prepare for death. You know, I'm going to finish the story. When you got to go to the airline, when you got to get your flight, when you got a deadline, everything narrows down to that, doesn't it? You don't start cleaning your windows just before you get your, suddenly you prioritise everything. It's such a good example. You focus everything on packing your bag and going to the airport. Everything else comes second, isn't it? That's the way to think about death. So that's what he was. You could tell he was doing that. He was completely joyful, totally focused. He talked about nothing else. Because what the hell, you don't want to talk about breakfast. He's going to die any minute, you know? It was very obvious. It was really powerful. So if you have a way to understand it like he did, then he was happy. But whereas if you're living in denial, which is the commonest one, then it's utter terror. Because finally, this is the point about attachment. Attachment is what keeps us perky throughout our lives. We might have virtue. We're good people, you know. But what keeps us going and is the constant always looking forward to something. That's one of the key functions of attachment. So when you know, even instinctively, when people know death is coming, this is why it is torture. And you ask people have different stories. Some people die joyfully. But the torment, the unhappiness, the stress, and especially you have no one to help you, like in those old people's homes where you die like an old vegetable, you know, drugged out of your brain, waiting for you to die so they can use your bed for the next person. And you just can only conceive of the pain and because most people don't think about death. Most people don't prepare for death. Most people don't have a view about death. They just live their life. And then they're all gone. Now they're old and ugly. Children don't come and see them. I can't even bear the thought of some of the way some old people die, you know. It's unbearable. And you can think of their minds, tormented. Most people don't work on their minds. It's not being rude. And now suddenly you're left on your own, old, shitting in your bed, drugged out of your brain, tormented, and death comes. I mean, it's just too horrible. So to be ready for it and be in charge of the process. That's the whole point, you know. And of course the logic for Buddhism is because your mind will continue. This is a really logical point. Because as we discussed briefly, but I'll go into more detail now, about the technical process of how death is described. This is the Vajrayana literature. There's great details about exactly what happens, this gradual deconstruction process, and at exactly what point the karmic seed that you have planted kicks in. That will be the one that will program you to go to your next life. That all happens before you even stop breathing. And that's when you're needed most. That's why I was so interested in June. Where is she? I mean, I haven't met June before. We haven't met me before, have we? No. And all I know is you said, what will you do? And I said, well, you know, to Mum. Mum's old. How old was she?
87.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, I said, well, okay, here's a link to Lama Zopa on YouTube singing the Medicine Buddha mantra. Send that to your sister or your daughter. And somehow it got through, and they did it, and your mum died that night, right? Well, that's like you won from the Buddha's point of view, you won the lottery. Even if you'd been mean to your mum all your life, but you helped her when she needed you most, the Buddha's view, because that would have helped her mind become more peaceful, more blissful. The Buddhas would have grabbed her mind. I mean, I know all this sounds like religion and everything. And then she would have got another decent human rebirth. You helped her exactly when she needed it. That would be what Lama Zopa would say. In other words, to help them navigate this really very painful process, this thing called dying, you know. So what we're discussing here is these 3 points, first of all, to use as our framework to how to live our life before death comes, so we can be ready for death. This is a massive part of it. You don't wait for you don't wait before your driving test appointment to start learning to drive, do you? You don't wait for it's obvious you prepare, but we don't know how to think that if we, when it comes to death, certainly with a materialist view. And why would we have a view? Because all you do is turn into vegetables, so we think it doesn't matter. If you've got a Christian view, you've got a basis. You have a Muslim, you've got a basis. A way of thinking about what happens after death. So it does depend upon our philosophy, doesn't it? So the first one is, death is definite. When do you think it? Well, every time you read about it, every time you think about it. Okay, that'll happen to me. The next one, and it could be today. And the next one, what'll I do? What's the point? When it does come, what's the point, What's the point? The third point, what's the point? What's the point? The point is this. Given Buddha's view, these are givens, it's clear, part of the process, that your consciousness is beginningless and endless. Given that every single thing you think and do and say will sow seeds in your mind that will produce your future, given that everything that's labelled negative, which is an action motivated by a delusion, which is much of our ordinary actions, will ripen as future suffering, and given that your virtuous actions will ripen as future happiness, and given that we want happiness and don't want suffering, well, it's a no-brainer. It concludes, therefore, I better start pulling out seeds now and start sowing some decent ones. That's it. That's the logic. That's it. That's the logic. I better start practicing now. That's it. That's it. I've been hearing this for 42 years and I still don't get it. Is it true? You get it yet? Little bit? Little tiny bit. Sneak in. It's very interesting because the strength of this grasping at permanent me is very, very fascinating. We can see it if we think like this, Because and the thing is, it's not a fearful thing that you could die today. We don't do research like this. But if you think, well, around here, 50-kilometre radius, you won't find anybody. But if you're living in a city and you go around a 50-kilometre radius with your little kind of survey board, knock on a door, good morning, madam. Did anybody die here last night who didn't expect to? You will get lots of yeses. Now, we know this, but we sort of, when we hear it, we say, yeah, okay, who cares? Like, come on, give us a break. Let's talk about emptiness. It's much more interesting. It's a fact. It's a fact. So it's scientifically true that people die when they don't expect to. So it's scientifically true that people who will die today, even if they did expect to, but the ones who don't expect to. So death, the time of death is uncertain. And even my friends on death row, Frank, he was this fellow on death row in Kentucky with Mitch. He was getting ready for his death date and suddenly leukemia got him instead. Boom, quick, surprise. And equally the other way around, I tell this story, it's always at the expense of my friends. I always feel ashamed when I tell the story, but it's true. Some Buddhist friends, they were divorced. And then he got this virulent cancer. He was going to be dead in a couple of months. So she went back to live with him to help him die. Do his practices every day. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, he didn't die. So even death is not definite. Even death is impermanent. He became a living person. As Lama Zopa says, we divide the world into living people and dying people. And think about that. Living people. We think we're living people. It's hubris. I'm a living person. Why? Because I haven't got a disease. What a joke. It's like a farce. Living people die before dying people every day. And you think about a dying person, that label dying person, think about it. It's horrible. Oh, she's dying. You can't even talk to them. Because how can you talk to a dying person? They don't have a life. You look sad at them. You speak with hushed tones. Oh, she's dying. It's hilarious. It's bizarre. We make up these stories. It's ridiculous. And it's not a joke to say that living people die before dying people every day. It's a fact. If we did our research, we could prove it to be true, but we don't get it because the delusion in the mind is so profound. The belief in permanent me, and because we can't bear the thought of it, so we just cover it up, That's how delusions work. It's very fascinating. So she had to leave him again. And now he's still alive. She doesn't know where. He's somewhere. He's alive again. And the other way too, I always tell this story. A friend of mine went to Los Angeles to help his daddy die of cancer. Well, he stayed alive. He got better. So they're literally having a party to celebrate. The next morning he dies of a heart attack. It's like, it's funny, but it's not funny. Because we grasp at it as permanent. Whatever that thing is, even if it's death, we see it as permanent. And we put all these stories around it. remember one time I read in Time magazine one story about how we deal with death in America, you know, and this guy is CEO of some big company, and he was diagnosed with MS. Also, that's a slow death, right, isn't it? He thought, well, there's no reason to tell anybody. And they thought, no, I better tell my board of directors. Well, they fired him immediately. Who wants a dying person running a company, you know? How revolting. Because look at the, I mean, it's so clear, it's so absurd. So much fear. Clearly so much fear and disgust, aversion. It's like repulsive. Dying people, oh my God, no. It's so clear what it means. It's so clear what it's saying about what we think, you know. Which proves attachment and grasping at permanence. They're the two main delusions there, it's very clear. That's why the idea of reincarnation is so abstract. I mean, it's the view I use in my life. I've chosen to take this view as my hypothesis. You know? But the way we see things and feel, it's this bubble of me is so powerful. And to think of becoming, quote unquote, another person is like a joke for us, you know? But the more, and so it takes time, for me, it seems, it takes time to think about the view of karma, to read the literature, to understand how karma works, to understand, and the more we understand emptiness, by the way, the more this makes sense. How nothing has an intrinsic nature. And the Buddhist view about karma, the shape of our body, the kind of body we have, every tiny part of it is the fruit of actions. Because it's not some mystical thing like a creator, and it's not just the physical. Everything we are, the way our mind works, the way our body works, whether we have our ear going this shape or that shape, or tongue going this way instead of that way, all due to past actions. It's like the architecture of who we are our own architects. There's no creator doing it with this mystical view. We create, our actions have created ourselves and our bodies. So when you think of that, and then you think of the kind of body you've got, and then you look at a fish, you know, like some of those fishes, those amazing fishes, these massive mouths and these colours, and you think every bit of that is due to some actions they've done. Then you start to think about the meaning of karma, you know, the meaning of actions. You think of attachment. I remember one of those animal shows, you know, Attenborough, that wonderful man. Always so excited, so enthusiastic. He's like 99 or something now, he's still working, you know. Anyway, I remember this show about the different types of creatures, and one was these amazing ants, and he's in Africa somewhere, like this 8-foot, you know, ant hills, and all the analysis of it, and how extraordinary they are, how intelligent, and how, you know, here it's exactly 22.7 degrees something, and you go here, and all these ants work incredibly well, constructing this amazing thing. And he said it's fascinating that over the years they're getting more and more intelligent, and no one understands why. So I thought about the view of karma, that whatever you are is the fruit of what you've done, and all the habits you have, you bring them with you. So you'll all laugh now, but this is a logical deduction with karma. So these ants with these ingenious capacity for architecture and engineering and whatever those things are, programmed in their mind, where did that come from? From being genius engineers and architects as a human, but based completely on attachment. So due to attachment, they're born as little ants. But all the memories of how to do things are there. That's why they're such ingenious creatures, because you don't lose any ability. It all stays there. There was this bird that danced for 8 hours a day. All I saw was a ballet dancer, you know, but with attachment. Attachment's the killer. Or these birds, these boy birds have to make houses to attract the girls. I saw architects, you know. And this is not meant to be sarcastic or fundamentalist, it's just using this concept, using this view, that's the one I've taken as my hypothesis, to try and work out why a being looks like that. Why do you have this habit? In exactly the same way, a human, they've got the first track of karma due to virtue. They get a human body. But since they're born, they want to torture. They harm. They want to abuse, steal. It's there in their mind. From what? Past habit. We bring everything with us, you know. So it might be in a lion's body, you get the habit to kill, but you might get a human life and have the habit to kill. Or like these monkeys, there's some kind of monkey or chimp or something that really attached to sex. So when this little boy gets born, he turns around and he has sex with his mum. Then with his dad, and his brother, and his sister, and his auntie, and his uncle, and his friends, and his enemies. They really like sex. Habit. It's unbelievable. It's just karmic habit, you know, it's just habit. You bring your habits with you. In the same way, these little girls who are writing, you know, 7-year-old American girl writing orchestral pieces for 64-piece orchestras. Or the little boy who's having the lice taken out of his head, my friend Dechen, her 3-year-old son, crying with compassion for the lice. Mommy, Mommy, don't hurt them. It's their home. Or another little boy who wants to kill fish. And there's habits in us, you know. And even the body we have is the way the body is shaped due to past actions. We did it. We're the creators. So thinking about this, then it doesn't seem so abstract to think you could be born a fish with a big mouth. Because you're always, you know, getting it pumped up, or too thin, or too big, or getting extra lines, lippy, you know. Dancing all day. Doing maths all day with attachment. So there's one thing is our technical skills, and the other is the ethics part of it. And that's what I think is fascinating in our culture. We see intelligence as something that's incredible. We revere art and science most. That's the top dogs. They're the top dogs in our culture, aren't they? They're the ones we revere. And you can be, if you're a genius, you can be forgiven for going home and raping your husband. Because we don't think ethics has got anything to do with wisdom. And that's the interesting point the Buddha makes. Wisdom and ethics completely hand in hand. This is truly fascinating point to think about. Just to have intellectual intelligence, but have attachment, that you turn into an ant, turn into a lion, turn into a dog, turn into a monkey that likes sex, turn into a clever bird. That's not being sarcastic or funny. This is Buddha's view of the universe, you know, that all sentient beings are the fruit of their own actions. So it's an amazing analysis to do, to look at the shape of a being and attempt to think of what actions caused it, you know, including us. They say that, so for us they say the human body with the human brain and the human capacity, therefore the human mind, is the best of a bad lot. It's still pretty degenerate, pretty deluded in this samsara we're living in. But they say if you look at what you've done in the past, you see your body, which is the fruit of virtue. This is the fruit of non-killing. You look at a lion's claws. And I used to have long red nails. You know, you treasured your red nails because the smallest thing would break them. Try to rip out the guts of a buffalo with your nails, girls, and you couldn't. They've got fingers and hands made for killing. Who created that? Their own tendency to kill. Some creatures with certain teeth, made for killing. What from? Their tendency to kill. They get the body they deserve. And that's what, if you want to connect evolution to karma, it's very interesting. You know, it's like there are all these beings. There are all these beings over centuries, all kinds of bodies that adapt to their environment, don't they? That's what we mean by evolution. That's true, that's a fact. But the difference is, the Buddhist one is all these different consciousnesses coming from different lifetimes. So let's say I've been a human in one life, and then due to my actions in this life, I've programmed myself, and I'm looking for the right kind of house to get born in. Due to my actions, I'll get born to a lion mummy, ready-made to keep killing. Or I'm going to be born to a certain fish due to vanity or pride or arrogance. I'm going to be born to that house and this house. And while I'm in that house, I'll do some adjusting of the housekeeping and I'll leave and get born in another animal's body. So it is true, evolution is right, but the consciousnesses that go into those houses have got the karma to be born like that. Can you see what I'm saying, people? If you take the view of karma. Silence. I presume you understand what I'm saying. It's just, this is analysis based on this view. Buddha might be wrong. I'm prepared to find out. I think of my Mexican friends in prison. I joke to Mexicans. I never met a Mexican until I met Mexican prisoners in California, you know. And generally speaking, they're very intelligent, very big hearts. But they're born in this culture in Los Angeles, these gangs, you know, every block there's a gang. Since they're tiny, that's all they know. So, you know, you can think of a person then who's got, let's say, you know, born as a human, very intelligent, very creative, big heart, but some karma to be violent and to have this kind of gang mentality, you know. So you look, when you die, you're looking for a new mum. Where's the best mum? Oh, Mexican mum in Los Angeles, that's the right mum to have. Best environment. You get the environment you create. You get the body you create. Your actions cause it. And so the evolution part is when those fishes adjust as they're going, and then the new minds keep coming into them and do the adjusting while they're there. Then they leave that house and go take a lizard house or a dog house or a human house. Are you with me, people? That fits, you know. We sentient beings do it, though. Minds do it. And they're the fruit of actions, not a creator. Nothing to do with a creator. We do it. these mountains, due to the eons of the karmic actions of sentient beings, that the mountains manifest in a certain shape and form, you know, due to actions. Karma. So all this thinking helps us then think about death and the likely possibility, because the next step that a teacher would get us to think about after we think about death and impermanence is the likely possibilities of types of rebirth. So Buddha's got this whole spectrum from his own observation, and this is where you can see that similar humans and similar different views in the world have seen, it seems to me, have observed similar things, but clearly have different interpretations of them, you know. So from the Buddhist point of view, that the universe consists of trillions of beings. Some of them are liberated, some of them are Buddhas, you know, no longer ordinary beings who've done the job of ridding their minds of rubbish. And then the rest of us are ordinary beings. And then we're all divided into then we're in this, and what that means being a samsaric being, in samsara. I don't know what the translation of that word means. But it means it's a person who's caught up in the delusions still, who's got ego grasping to whatever degree, and the other delusions to whatever degree. That's what defines you as a samsaric person. So he divides samsara into the three realms of existence. So the sum, and this is coming very much from the Hindu experiences, as far as they could go with the depth of their own capacity for meditation, was to get to this subtlest state of where you don't have gross elements at all, no gross aggregates at all, just pure subtle mind in the subtlest state. The Buddha that's where he diverged. He said they're still in samsara because still there's the root of ignorance there. They haven't removed that. So there's a bunch of the form beings and formless beings. Forget them. Then we've got where we are. They call it the desire realm, where we're defined by attachment. And there's 6 suburbs in this desire realm, and all are in terms of on the spectrum from the most intense bliss to the most intense suffering. All the fruit of delusions. Some virtue there. So the God realm, they call the God realms. There's a couple of these. And that's similar to the Christian view of heaven, the Muslims' view of paradise. There's this state of being as a result of incredible virtue, lots of goodness. Goodness naturally purifies the mind, which naturally purifies the 4 elements, which naturally causes a type of rebirth where your karmic appearances are of incredible bliss and your physical elements are subtle light. They're talking about this as real, and this is described especially in the Vajrayana model of the universe. And it lasts for a long time, and their state of being is bliss. Their karmic appearances are everything's blissful, radiant. It's the fruit of virtue. No one sends you there. You create it. But you're still in samsara. Eventually it'll run out, the petrol tank runs out, and you've still got ego grasping, you've still got karmic imprints you haven't purified, so you have suffering again. Further down the track, you've got the humans. And that's the best of a bad lot. We clearly haven't got bodies of light. But we've got enough. The key element of a human mind is access to virtue because of intelligence. And intelligence is, to some degree, understanding dependent arising. That, for the Buddha, is reality. Dependent arising is reality. Things exist interdependently. And some level of intelligence that gets that is what is the key characteristic of a human mind, which also therefore means access to virtue and empathy with others. Why we can have any empathy with others is because we have a sense of dependence, interdependence. This is logical. If children and I are sitting away having a chat, and we're friends, you can see by our body language that we're being kind to each other. I laugh at her jokes, she laughs at my jokes, you know, I empathise with her headache. Do you understand? You can see we can say at that moment in time that kindness, love, compassion are predominating. It's evident. And look at how we are. There's not a vivid feeling of 2 separate people, is there? Even just being friendly to people, there's a sense of connectedness. Would you agree with that? There's a sense of we. But you look what happens when suddenly we start fighting. That we is cut in half. Suddenly there's terror. How dare she say that about me? And she's saying, how dare you say that about me? Suddenly there's 2 vivid, neurotic, ridiculous, panic-stricken little eyes there, with no sense of interdependence. But look, when virtue is there, there's a feeling of connectedness, which is interdependence. That's reality. That's scientific reality for the Buddha, that things exist interdependently. And when everything is working, which is virtue, everything's harmonious. So when the elements are working, it's a result of virtue. The elements being disruptive is a result of non-virtue over many eons of time. or as Lama Zopa says in the Kala Chakra Tantra. The intimate relationship between internal and external energies. Internal is the mind, external is the elements. And in this model, which we'll describe in the death process, we've got these subtle physical energies, this subtle channel nervous system with subtle wind energies coursing through this nervous system of ours, and then it's linked inextricably with the wind. The mind is connected to the wind. As she said this morning, the mind rides on the winds. So when your mind is angry, let's say, or jealous or neurotic, that pollutes your wind energies, which in turn causes sickness, which in turn karmically affects the external elements, which causes them to be unbalanced, earthquakes, etc. This is the Buddhist view of it. Not creators, not accident, not random. This is karma. So we create the bodies we get, we create the lives we get, we create the karmic visions we have. So you've got these gods, the result of just plain being good people, but that's not enough. Human is less blissful, but we've got access to virtue and intelligence, and that's the key factor. That's the characteristic of a human mind. Virtue, non-harming, and intelligence, therefore, and dependence, because virtue and wisdom come together. And that's why I started to think about this planet. When do we say humans started on this planet? Who knows that? Anybody studied that? But the idea that we come from the monkeys, that's ridiculous for the Buddha. That's absurd. You can't possibly come from monkeys. What happened is, if you think of that evolution thing I said before, there were those monkeys, and at some point, it seems to me, when the humans must have started on this planet at some point, but not coming from nowhere. Human births have been for since countless times, countless eons, but in different levels. Not just this planet, because minds are beginningless. So human minds have been beginningless. Wisdom has been beginningless. So at some point, this is a sign of degeneration, that at some point a human mind, which before this planet would have been much more subtle, much more blissful, with no access to gross delusions, but eventually attachment began to grow, pollute the elements, and create this body of 5 senses. Look at this 5 holes of demand feeding. That's what we're basically a body of a junkie. And so at one point we landed on this planet looking like a bunch of apes. So I wonder when humans did actually start. It can't be that many thousands of years ago. Where does history say that there are people who are actually virtuous and didn't harm each other? I don't think there's many on this planet, are there? You see what I'm saying? That's really what a human birth is. I remember hearing this on BBC World Service one time. These archaeologists investigating the Hindu civilization, the Indian one, and they found no weapons of destruction. That tells me something. They must have been real. That's what a real human being is, a virtuous person who doesn't have the wish to harm. That's how Buddha talks. Are you with me, people? So it's just interesting to think about these things. If you want the Buddha's view, you don't have to. So then you've got further down the spectrum, you've got they're called the upper realms. They're the best suburbs. And then you've got the bad suburbs, and they keep getting worse. So the next one, and these are just manifestations of the 3 root delusions. They're manifestations, these realms of existence are manifestations of the 3 main toxic emotions. So the next one is the animals. And that could include all the tiny bugs, the fishes, the lions, the tigers, all those, and the tiny little creatures. There's all the animal realm. And they actually talk about the main beings of the animal realm, the worst suffering, because this is the predominance of ignorance, the root delusion, where the mind literally is literally ignorant. Very highly developed senses, maybe, very clever, but in the mental consciousness, deeply ignorant. That's why Lama Zopa said, as shocking as it is to us, that if you could have a moment of direct realization, direct experience of your little dog's mind, your precious little happy dog, the suffering, the mental suffering would be so unbearable. You'd not want to waste a single second of this precious human life. That really needs thinking about, So the predominant suffering of the animals is this profound ego grasping, 1 billion times heavier than our ego grasping, the root delusion. Therefore bringing enormous attachment, enormous aggression, enormous fear, and all the other delusions that we can see evident in animals. Jealousy, pride, we can see it all. They're exactly the same, but 1 million times heavier, because they can't access their virtue. That's hidden. It's buried under the seeds of all their delusions. That's the suffering of an animal realm. And then, but they say the main suffering of the animal realm, the worst aspect of the ignorance part, is that there's these billions of beings in the depths of the ocean, piled high in the depths of darkness and ignorance. Now, I find this very fascinating. That's how they describe it in the Lam Rim. But I remember reading like 30 years ago in the New York Times science pages that we're now finding billions of new species of beings in the depths of the ocean where we didn't think there would be any beings living, piled high in the depth of darkness upon each other. The Buddha would say the whole universe is pervaded by sentient beings. There's not an atom of space where you won't find a sentient being. And he would talk in the animal realm. Then you've got even more suffering, and this is the predominance of attachment energy, and this is called the spirit. They're spirits. Spirit in Buddhism doesn't mean like soul. It means these disembodied beings whose really, you could argue, their physical energy is air energy, and their minds conjoined with that, and their predominant energy is unbelievable, billion times stronger attachment and grasping. I mean, on this human planet, we have a lot of contact. They're called ghosts, for example. They're real beings who, due to their negative karma, certain kind of beings, for example, are very attached to a certain place. So you get reborn there as a spirit. You haunt the place, literally. When you have strong connection with other beings, other people, and you die with a lot of anger, and you get born as a spirit, what's wrong? Oh, I'm playing with it, making a terrible sound. Okay, I'll control myself. So, spirits then, you know, we can see a lot have, you know, if you've got a strong relationship with somebody and you fight with each other all the time and then you die, well then you'll be born as a spirit and you'll possess that person. You know, we hear about people hearing voices. For many of those experiences, for the Buddhist view, they are hearing voices. They're literally possessed by beings, you know. Spirits whom they have strong karmic connection with, who harm them, but you know, we meet humans who harm us. Well, these are beings who are born as spirit, whom we have karmic connection with, who harm us. So many stories you hear, you know. This is not uncommon in the Buddhist understanding. Many stories, I can tell you. Geshe Lama Kontrok is amazing. I want to read from his story. I want to read to you about him. He's incredible. He passed away in Kopan in 2001. His stupa is at Kopan. And his reincarnation lives in that house there. He's about 16 or something now. And by the way, there's a Scottish girl who's also his reincarnation. I'll tell you about her. So many stories, I'll lose track where I am. Anyway, she's like, from the time she was born, she was born in Scotland, in Findhorn in Scotland, and has got a German daddy and an Estonian mummy. She's a Sufi, and Thomas is a Buddhist. So anyway, this girl, from the time she could talk, she would see this picture of Geshe Lama Kontrok. She said, "That's me. That's who I am." She always said it was her. She was very clear. So eventually she met the lamas, and then you know, she always acted very unusual and sat there at all the teachings and met His Holiness and met Lama Zopa and went to Kopan. Very unusual girl, very extraordinary, and she's got the power of speech. She doesn't talk much. She's very low key, but you just can't help but listen when she talks. She's very amazing. Anyway, she's like 15 or 16 now, more maybe. And one time, and then this is a bit gossip now. Okay, this is gossip, but it was a bit sort of difficult at Kopan. Because then, you know, all these typical traditional Tibetan and Nepali boys and people thinking that this blonde, blue-eyed girl, they're daring to say that that's the reincarnation of their lama, you know. So there's a sort of, you know, a bit sort of like this. So at some point, the abbot there, Lama Nunda, because they would often criticise Thomas, the father, you know, for pushing his daughter, like in Hollywood, you know, the reincarnation of this lama. So at some point, Lama Nunda got this amazing old lama at Kopan, he's dead now, he did divinations, he's kind of clairvoyant. And so he got him to do a special divination. Is she or is she not the reincarnation of Geshe Lama Kontrok? Well, he did his divination and he said, yes, she is. So Lama Zopa had a picture of this girl. So one of the monks was always complaining and didn't like Thomas. Lama Zopa gave him a picture of this girl. He said, "You put this on your altar." It was very good for him. I think as Lama Zopa said to somebody, Jane Sidless, I think, you know, it's a bit difficult for the Tibetans. Very traditional, seeing this blue-eyed blonde girl saying that that's the reincarnation of their lama. But she's not the formally recognised one. There is the main one, who is the monk, but she's informally known as the reincarnation of Geshe Lama Kontrok. There are quite a few girls these days, Western girls actually, who are seen as really unusual reincarnations of yogis. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Is it common that a reincarnation will be more than just one person?
Yeah, of course it's common. I mean, lowest level bodhisattva manifest their mind in 100 forms simultaneously. They're busy running around the earth manifesting, but whether they're recognised is the other point. They're not always recognised. Do you understand? That's the point. It's clear they're going to be manifesting all the time. Lama Yeshe was considered the reincarnation of this abbess, but because Tibetans are a bit, you know, patriarchal, he wasn't formally recognised, but he was recognised by a certain lama as a reincarnation of this abbess. And then the nuns grabbed hold of him and took him and then sent him off to Sarah J. But he was not formally recognised because it was a reincarnation of a woman. Okay, guess I'm a contract. There's one amazing yogi. He was Lama Yeshe's friend at Sarah, and he was extraordinary since the time, at a very small age. He was a most unusual person, very much his own boss. He was amazing yogi, an incredible practitioner, incredible scholar. Then when he left Tibet at the time of all the business in '59, he, I think he had a dream of Milarepa, and Milarepa told him how to go across the mountains or something. So he ended up going up to this place that's called Tsum, an area right on the top end of Nepal on the border of Tibet, where literally no one ever goes. It's just this isolated. I mean, this is not isolated comparison. They didn't have shoes, dead poor, no such thing as money, really, really unbelievably poor. Buddhists, right close, fairly close to the, the Tibetan border. So there are all these caves up there where Milarepa in the 11th century used to live. So he went up there. He had some dreams, and he went up there and he started to meditate. And he was in these various caves, and I've been doing his biography, and then anyway it stopped for a few years for whatever reason. But I'll read you from one of the stories, very moving actually. And he eventually got to the point, like Milarepa, where he didn't need clothing. He didn't need clothes or food or sleep. He was this great yogi, getting enlightened, doing all the work, 24 hours a day, naked in his cave, So he met. Anyway, eventually after whatever, he started meeting different people, and he came back down to Kathmandu, and then he ended up at Kopan. He was a friend of Lama's from Sarah. When they first met him, they thought he was this old country bumpkin. He'd lived in the naked, in 6 foot of snow in the winter, living like this naked in a hole in the wall with no front on it, can you imagine? Because he has complete control over his internal energies, So they can retain their warmth in their body, and they don't need food. Also, they don't even need to even drink water, I think. So there's this type of pill the Tibetan doctors make, which yogis use, great meditators. They call it chulen, taking the essence. They extract the essence from all the minerals and the flowers. And these yogis, when you really meditate deeply, you don't need food, so they can live on the essence of these things, these pills. Well, he lived on the essence of the air. He kind of ate the air, He was able to take what he needed from the air. So he lived like this for many, many years. And then he eventually met people and became their Lama, and then he, whatever. So anyway, when he was involved with all the group, he was involved with these people in this area of Tsum. They got to know about him when he finally started connecting with the monasteries and he built nunneries and monasteries and took care of the people. He was like their local Lama up in his cave, right? So one of the things that all these people can do, when you've got to this degree, got this level of realizations where you can completely control the internal energies, you can also control the external energies. This fits with this model, the Vajrayana model of the universe. So they're able to manipulate the weather. That's easy, nothing special. I've seen Lama Yeshe do that. They can, they're completely clairvoyant. They can heal, all these, because they can work with the physical energies of the universe. So up there, there's this one, they talk about spirits, that's common for Buddhists. I remember one old Lama, Song Rinpoche, when he was taken to an insane asylum in Spain. I don't want to, insane asylum sounds rude, doesn't it? But whatever. He said, they're all possessed, spirits. When they say they're hearing voices, most of the cases they literally are possessed by a spirit. That's how they talk, Okay, the Christians call it the devil. They don't call it that. That's these suffering sentient beings whom you have karmic connection with. Many stories. Anyway, one lovely story, this about Geshe Lama Konchog. Some of the nuns came traipsing up to his cave one day in tears because Annie Tenzin's gone crazy. Annie Tenzin's gone crazy. Annie, they use the term Annie. It actually means auntie. They refer to nuns as auntie, isn't it? Tibetans are very patriarchal, but they're learning. They're getting better now, having contact with Westerners. Anyway, Annie Tenzin's gone crazy, so Geshe Lama Konchog went down there, and of course he can ride, he can walk on the air. He just goes about, and people have seen him do that. There's all these yogis because they can control the external elements and the internal, so they can do what they like. They can fly. I'm not joking. This is all true. You have to believe me. So he rushes down to the cave, gets there in to the house, the nunnery, because he gets there half the time. So, he knows exactly what's going on. He sees who the spirit is, a local villager. And the story is like this. He goes up to this spirit and this possessing this nun because he wants something. Because the spirits are full of attachment. They want one of their possessions. So what do you want, he said. And the spirit in the nun was crying, I want my pink thermos with the white flowers. I want my pink thermos with the white flowers. And they looked and there it was. And they remembered. The guy who died recently had lent or given this nun a pot of tea, a thermos. And they have no possessions up there. And she forgot to give it back. So he's pissed off, angry. He dies with attached to his bloody thermos. So he gets born as a spirit and possesses her, get it back. So be careful what you're attached to, people. Because he knows who it is. And even the spirit knew Genla. He kept being embarrassed. Don't look at me, sort of thing. So he was able to, so what they do is they give the thermos away and do something useful with it. Or if they don't, another story I'll tell you about another story in a minute. So anyway, they give the thermos away, and then he does special things. And the spirit was crying. It was very interesting. He was crying and saying, I can't find my way. I can't find my way. Because they say these spirits, their bodies are made of air. Your mind's conjoined with air, so you flit from pillar to post. Look at our minds now in our fat big bag of bones. We flit from pillar to post. Well, their mind's never stopping, raging, go here, go there, do this, do that. We're demented, but our poor body stops us. But they've got a body of air, so it's really like insane. They're nightmarish experiences. There's no control, just driven by this insane, demented grasping and attachment. And that's just one kind of spirit. So anyway, he does certain things and he helps them get a decent life. They can do that, these holy beings. But another time at Kopan, one of the women at one of the courses there, she lost the plot, and he said, oh, she went berserk, And Geshe-la said, you'll find something in her luggage that is belonging to this spirit who's possessing her. So they found this Jewish thing, that she was Jewish, and she said her father had bought it in an antique shop. Well, I've got second thoughts about buying second-hand things now, because you've got to get the bloody spirit who owned it, come and possess you, want their thing back. So anyway, this poor woman's going bonkers, and one of the common ways that you see the lamas do it to help the spirit go, they use very wrathful methods, and this is very common. So he got a shoe and he's bashing this poor woman, beating the woman with a shoe, but he's shouting at the spirit. They give the object away first, they throw it away as far as they can to break the connection, then they shout and yell at the spirit, well, you leave here now. And sometimes they don't. I have so many stories, I tell you, it's very fascinating. If you take this view, I'm taking this view as real, okay? Very fascinating. Well, Lama Zopa apparently would never use wrathful methods. There's one woman in Malaysia or somewhere possessed by this spirit. And remember, they spent hours and hours and hours trying to cajole the spirit to go. And finally the spirit accepted a cup of tea and said they'd go after that. He didn't beat him up, Yeah.
Thank you. If somebody is reborn into the spirit world, are they trapped there for eternity?
No, that's how the Christians talk. No, that's how some people talk, like New Age people or maybe the spiritualists talk. It's just a type of rebirth, and it'll last a certain time. And it will run out as well, just like the karma. It'll run out. It might last a long time because they haven't got bodies that disintegrate so easily. So the karma can be quite long. It's not so much trapped. We're all trapped. But it's not as if that's unique. No, not like that. It's just another type of rebirth. It's not as if there's either. Often the views in the world about these kinds of things is there's human and then the spirits. That's it. It's not like that for the Buddhists. Spirit's just one kind of rebirth as a result of certain karma, and it lasts a long time for sure. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Unless you meet someone like Geshe-la who can help you. Then further down the spectrum, you've got the hells. And it's plural. I'm sorry, it's plural. And Lama Zopa is famous for his early courses to Westerners. They began these courses in Kopan. I think the first one was like 70 or something. 12 people came for this course from Lama Zopa, a 1 month Lamrim course, Then by about the third course or fourth, there were lots of people coming, a couple of hundred people, in Kopan, when they had no buildings, just a big tent. And there's one course that was famous because Lama Zopa takes his text and he reads this traditional Lamrim stuff, which is written in the Middle Ages. It's medieval, which doesn't mean it's not true, but the framing of it's very medieval. So he starts getting into the lower realms, and he spends 3 of the 4 weeks talking about the hells. So all these hippies, this absolute uproar, doing what kind of world have we come to? This course is famous. So Lama Zopa now he'll say the word hell, and then he'll crack a joke and change the subject. I mean, this is the universe. It's very interesting because anyway, this is still the Buddha's view. This is the view we're discussing here, and this is my working hypothesis, I can tell you. So the hells is the predominance of anger. So we take this interesting point. If you take the view of the 4 elements, which is this Vajrayana view of the universe, made of the 4 elements, all minds are conjoined inextricably with our own set of the 4 elements. It's just the way the universe is, Buddha says. No one made it this way. So whatever like I said, whatever your mind does impacts upon your elements. So if you can imagine lots of killing and lying and stealing as a human, you're programming your mind, you're polluting your physical elements, and then you'll be reborn with your mind conjoined with fire element. I mean, why not? The spirit is conjoined with air energy. You can say it like that. So the karmic appearances of unbelievable suffering, That's how they talk. So the vast majority of all sentient beings are in these lower realms, according to the Buddha's view. Tiniest minority is human. That's how they say. So given these are all the options of rebirth, having thought about impermanence, you think, well, thank you very much, but I don't want to get born as those. Then you think, well, whom can I turn to? Who's the doctor? So that's where you would then learn about refuge, and you'd take refuge in the Buddha, and then you start to practice. Now you start to put your money where your mouth is, and you abide by the laws of karma. Why? Because the first level of it, simple, junior school, humble, ordinary. I don't want more suffering. Thank you. Conclusion, result, action, stop harming others. That's first level of practice. Because harming others is the cause of getting lower realm rebirth. That's it. Very simple logic, very simple concept, but horrible to our minds. We can't even bear to say it. Many Buddhists don't even like talking about karma because they're so embarrassed. But I think we're all grown-ups. We're big enough to hear things we don't like. Yeah.
So what would the collective karma of the Tibetans have been to be forced out of their country?
Exactly. If you look at the result, it tells you the cause. And it could be 1,000 lifetimes ago as a collection with a group of people called the Chinese now. There wouldn't have been Chinese and Tibetan then. God knows what groups they were. And it could be many lifetimes ago such that right at that time, this karma between these two groups of 1,000 lifetimes ago ripened, where basically it's fairly clear the way they were treated: slaughtered, abused, imprisoned. So you can tell the cause. The cause is exactly that.
They would have done that.
Absolutely that, as a group. Look at the Jews, same thing. You know, exactly the same in Hitler time.
I have one other question.
Yeah. Go.
So people who aren't Buddhists, do they go into the animal realm?
Doesn't follow. Now you see, this is where it doesn't follow. Virtue brings a human birth. Virtue brings a God realm birth. That's why the Buddha would say it's a natural law. There's no one punishing and sending you here and there because you don't believe in something. Actions bring results. So actions that are predominantly motivated by delusions is what brings lower realm suffering, especially harming others. So it doesn't matter what you're labelled. So if you're a good human being and you're called a communist, then you'll get a human birth. If you call yourself a Muslim, and you'll get born in the hell realms. Depending on who cares what your views are, it's how you, bottom line is behaviour. Actions bring results. That's it, yeah.
If you were hurt or abused as a person by another person, how does that work out?
What do you mean work out?
Well, as far as karma goes, if you lived a good life but you've been...
Yes, harmed by others. That's a common story, isn't it? I mean, I think that's one of the ways where we suffer most on this planet, when we know we've been a good person, we know we've never harmed that person, and we get harmed by them. That's where we are so pained. Why is this happening to me? And then we look at the world and see innocent children and animals and innocent groups of people being slaughtered. That's where it's so painful. This is the kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause. The way you're treated by others is the result of your having done exactly that. To that person. Karma's pretty personal. And that's why for me, at least this view of karma, for me, at least within its own logic, it's coherent. Taking the view the mind is not physical, taking the view that actions bring results, then all of it is just a hypothesis, isn't it? For me, I haven't proven it yet. But at least for me, it's coherent within its own rules. You understand what I'm saying? So,
if that person, though, who has been abused or whatever, forgives their...
Yeah, that's right. Then you clean up, you finish the karma, baby. That's the one. That's why if you take this view, you don't want to keep meeting this. You're going to keep meeting this person whether you like it or not, but you don't want it to be ugly. You want it to be nice. So you better clean up your part of it now. You can't guarantee they will pick up their bit. So at least clean it up now. Really rip it out, and that's what's really hard. And that's why that story that those young nuns was such a good example. Brought up with this view since they're born. That's in the bones of their being. They live their life like that. They had this imprisonment. They were tortured, sexually abused. But we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we had harmed them, and because we knew that they would suffer because of what they've done. That's the basis of compassion. And that's not easy, but my goodness, this is the logic for it. Among the Tibetans, and that's why among most Tibetans, Dalai Lama used to say now, he was very sad that more Tibetans are getting more angry, meaning probably less, now they're becoming Western and they're not having the view of karma anymore, so just becoming like regular people, no view of karma, and therefore lots of anger, lots of attachment. But generally Tibetans, I'm trying to make them saints. They didn't have such a thing as environmentalism in Tibet because nobody disturbed the environment. They didn't harm the wild animals, there was no disturbance of it because they'd lived reasonable good lives of good ethics, They respected the earth because it's the home of sentient beings. They don't want to harm sentient beings. They killed a few yaks, I think, and ate their flesh. It's about the best they did. You understand? So they, you know, so then, anyway, blah, blah. Time for tea? What's the time?
23 past.
10. A few more minutes. Questions so far? We're going through this process of death and everything. Yes, darling.
Is the preta?
That's just,
Is that the hungry?
okay, so this is, yeah, preta is a Sanskrit word and it's referring to hungry ghosts, and that's just one type of spirit. And that's always the ones they mention in the Lam Rim. It's always so shocking because they're beings who always can't ever get any food. So it's a kind of really obvious example of incredible attachment. But there's just one kind of spirit. There's countless kinds of spirits, apparently. Some are very powerful. Some that appear to be very, very beneficial. Like many people, you know, many people who channel, when you say they hear voices and give advice, they're just spirits who are acting like holy beings. There's all kinds of spirits. Some some are very powerful, and often the result, the Buddhist view is that many big natural disasters can be caused by spirits. Many sicknesses can be caused by spirits. It's very common. The Tibetan doctors, by looking at your pee, they can tell if your sickness is caused by spirit interference. Like I had sciatica for a couple of years, really serious sciatica. Couldn't walk for more than 5 minutes. Luckily I could sit. And I remember I went to there was this woman healer actually. Did you ever know about her? The Sakya woman in Boda. She was like this crazy girl, and then Sakya Trinzen identified her as a little yogini. So she did healing. She'd do her prayers and her pujas, and people would all arrive at her house. She had a husband. Then she'd do this puja, and she'd manifest this one of the 5 Dakini sisters of Padmanabhamo, and she would heal people. And she would very fascinating. She would become this very wrathful being, and she would then bite you, and then spit out these little kind of chopped liver, and little rocks. It's like in the Philippines, and these spirits, these healers, and she would heal people. She was incredible, and so she said that the spirit was causing my sciatica. So we did prayers and different things, but nothing made it go away. And then one time in Kopan, somebody asked Lama Lunda, people who knew me said about me, and he recommended they do white tara for me. So they did these pujas. And I remember one day I was in San Jose with my friend Harvey and his wife Angela, who does Chinese medicine. And one day I knew something had changed. I had one treatment and it went away. But as long as these spirits are harming you, you can't get better. So they possess, they cause you sickness, because they're all around, they live everywhere. And you know, if you go pee under a tree, some of these spirits who live there will get really pissed off and they'll make you sick. That's how they talk. So anyway, there's all kinds of spirits that live on this planet, as well as share this earth with us, as well as other kinds that we don't see in their own kind of reality. Hungry ghosts is just one lot. What, darling? Oh, darling, I have never studied. I've never bothered. I've never done one meditation the way they talk about the Lam Rim. There's so many kinds. It's like a whole geography. It's a whole fascinating architecture and geography of these realms. All the result of actions. Lama Zopa's the expert. He will tell you all about them. Who else? Yeah.
So if the possessed person dies, is the spirit still attached to them?
I don't think so then. Well, it could be. It depends on how strong the karma is. Absolutely. It could well be. Could well be. I remember I've met many people, and I just take this view as a given that they've been possessed. Sometimes it's not very serious and it can change it. I remember one guy in Sydney. He came and he said just a few months ago, suddenly he became crazy and hearing all these voices telling him to do things. So I took it as a given that it was spirits. I gave him this particular mantra, and he emailed me the next day and said they went away. So, but another one, this woman in Canada, this is really a classic one for me. She said one day she was sitting in a cafe, she emailed me, she liked Lama, she found my email, she emailed me. And she said one day in the cafe, suddenly this fierce energy went in through her left side. And from that day, many beings, she said, many voices, abusive, squeezing her, squashing her lungs, abusing her day and night. She mightn't sleep for week upon week upon week. Just these constant nightmarish monsters just abusing her continuously. And no matter what she did, I had Lama Zopa do prayers. I had this other Lama somewhere else. She did things. She couldn't almost hardly talk sometimes. And I took it as a given that it was spirits, you know. And then I just stopped hearing from her. I think her father finally put her in an insane asylum, you know. So I just stopped hearing from her. It was very interesting. So many stories like that. Another friend of mine in America, she's possessed by what they call nagas, a type of animal type snake. And these beings have got some karma with the Dharma. So she said they live around about there. So they lived inside her for years. And then whenever she's around the Dharma, one time she was at Milarepa Center where Lama Zopa was there and Kiri Senchab, and they all come out because they want the Dharma. So she's writhing like this snake. Oh, you were there?
Yeah.
She's my dear friend. That's right, like a snake. That's it. That's right. That's it. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And she's a wonderful woman who just has an ordinary life and a husband who's understanding, luckily. Because they come out at night, you know. It's very fascinating. And no matter what the lamas did, they will not go away. The karma between her and these beings is so strong. So she just lives with them, tries to have compassion for them. When I was at a house one time, they came out, just a little bit came out, you know, started writhing. And she just lives with them, tries to have compassion. Well, you were there. How fascinating. How fascinating. There you go. How fascinating. That's fascinating. They spent hours with that and they couldn't take them away. Because the karma was so strong. There you go, that's right. I remember another woman in Queensland at Chen Raising Institute said she was possessed by many beings and they would rape her. And even as she's talking to me, I can see her physically change. It's very fascinating. If you take this view of sentient beings, you know, it's very interesting. Animals. We had a red setter who went mad, Janie. She just ran around in circles. That's very common. Animals can be possessed by spirits because when you're very vulnerable. Babies, you know, cot deaths. Cot deaths? In America they call them crib deaths. Babies just die. Spirits. One common thing, I had a spirit, one time ever I had an experience in the north of England, which is where all the spiritualists come from. There must lots of them live around there. And I was at Manjushri Institute and I was in bed and woke up immediately. I knew from the window something was coming in, crystal clear, lay on top of me and suffocated me. And I said, "Oh, Mani Padme Hum," and it left through the door. That's a common one with very vulnerable beings. That person we're talking about, she's very kind of vulnerable. Or animals can be possessed by spirits who just come and take you over and suffocate you, harm you. So those poor cot deaths, some mothers get sent to prison for life because they believe the mother did it, you know. It's terrible. Anyway, this is Buddha's view about sentient beings. So we can have tea time, silent tea time.